Okay, welcome to the Shaping Resilient, Engaged, and Livable Communities webinar. So tonight we are going to be talking about livable communities, participation in the municipal planning process, the importance of individual engagement, and how to turn that passion into a movement. My name is Garner Matthews. I'm a member of the Nith Valley Eco Boosters, and I'm happy to be your host for tonight. So just before we get started, I would like to thank our supporters for this event, the Township of Wilmot, the Kindred Credit Union, and the Future Ground Network. And we also wanted to start off with thanking the Honoring Indigenous Peoples organization for allowing us to use their logo for our land acknowledgement tonight. It is important to the Nith Valley Eco Boosters that we continue down the path of together in reconciliation. And with that said, we acknowledge with gratitude that we are presenting this webinar from Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee and Mississauga peoples. I also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community. There are many ways that those of us who live in the region of Waterloo can take action to show solidarity with Indigenous members of our community. The Indigenous Food Sovereignty Collective, Waterloo Region, the Healing of the Seven Generations, and the Wilmot Family Resource Center would welcome your help. Details of how to contact these agencies and what help they require will be sent out in a follow-up email to all participants in about 5 days. So now to the agenda, just quickly review. We're going to do a few more welcoming notes here, and then we'll be followed by our speakers, Kevin Eby, Tim Van Hinty, Suzanne Carrajerbilian, and Kevin Thomason. And then later on, we'll also be doing a Q&A session. So to submit questions for the Q&A portion this evening, just look to either the bottom or the top of your screen. There should be a little button that says Q&A. So just click that and enter in your questions, and also indicate with those questions if they're for a specific speaker or if they're for the entire panel. And please do not enter any questions into the chat function as we're not going to be reviewing that portion. Our speakers will attempt to answer as many of the questions as possible tonight, but depending on how many questions come in, if we get close to 9 o'clock, we may extend the webinar just to 9:10. But beyond that, then we may also be able to send them some responses out in an email. Please note also that when you leave the webinar tonight, a simple feedback survey will pop up on your screen. We would appreciate if you take a few minutes to complete that survey and just give us your thoughts on your webinar so we can keep making them better. Okay, and then coming to us an email, coming soon to an email near you. I also wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending an email to all participants in about 5 days that includes a YouTube link to the recording, as well as contact information for all the speakers, a document with all the resources, the webinar feedback survey, and details regarding specific actions that you can take to show solidarity, as I mentioned, with Indigenous members of the Waterloo Region community. Okay, so without further ado, our first speaker tonight is Kevin Eby. Kevin is a registered professional planner who previously served as the Director of Community Planning with the Regional Municipality of Waterloo. Kevin previously participated in the preparation of the original growth plan while on secondment with the Ministry of Public Infrastructure Renewal from 2004 to 2006. He was a member of the province's Greenbelt Council from 2018 to 2020 and currently provides growth management consulting services through his own consulting firm. Tonight, Kevin will address the topic of
livable communities.
Livable communities. Sorry, Kevin, your screen share just jumped over my notes there.
My apologies.
All right, take us away.
Thank you very much. I welcome the opportunity to speak to this issue, and As you'll see as I go through this, it's one that we've been dealing with for a while. A definition of livable communities is really communities that include essential features that allow residents of all ages and backgrounds to thrive. But first and foremost, we need to recognize that livability can't be achieved in the long term without dramatically reducing our community's contribution to climate change. And this includes reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, protecting ecological systems, further enhancing the protection of moraines and associated groundwater systems, and limiting urban development's consumption of precious land and resources. So how do we do all this? Whoa. First and foremost, it's by encouraging and facilitating travel by means other than by a private automobile. There is so much data out there now that indicates that there is a direct connection between the amount of automobile travel and many of the urban problems that are faced by especially larger municipalities. We need to support and create vibrant, compact, and transit-efficient neighborhoods. And these are the types of neighborhoods that are spoken to often as 15-minute neighborhoods, where everything that you need within your normal existence is available to you within a 15-minute walk. We need to recognize that there's a reduced need for single detached dwellings as our population ages. If you go back to 2002, we were building about 78% single detached dwellings. As of last year, we were building about 21%. And in fact, people have said, oh my goodness, we're seeing this dramatic drop because there's a lack of single detached lots. There isn't. There hasn't been, at no point has there been a shortage of single detached lots. This is a change in the marketplace that's been facilitated by the councils through programs that have provided alternative housing choice and alternative transportation choices. And just if anybody's afraid we're going to run out of singles for new people, 68% of all the people that owned houses in 2000, single detached houses in 2016, which is about 77,000 of them, in fact, will be over 80 years of age or dead in 2051. So we're going to have a phenomenal number of, especially the baby boom singles, recycle onto the marketplace. So we need to concentrate on other types of housing. We need to provide especially access to services and age-appropriate housing for our increasing number of seniors that we're going to have. And this is really critical, especially when you look at the townships, which have, all of them have above 80% single detached dwellings when you look at the current housing inventory. And yet there are thousands and thousands of people aging into what we would call seniors that live in the townships that otherwise are going to potentially grow out of their ability, either financially or physically, to continue to live in singles, and they want to remain in the communities. This is going to be a huge part of ensuring livability, is ensuring that that's available to everybody in our community. And we've got a lot of work to do in this area. Another thing is recognizing public health and urban planning go hand in hand. Car-dependent urban forms are linked with chronic ailments such as asthma, type 2 diabetes, obesity, depression, and planners need to work with the public health officials to overcome these ailments. And in fact, it's almost mind-boggling that when you look at the healthiest cities for example, in the United States, it's New York, Chicago, the large communities that you would think kind of intuitively would be exactly the opposite. But the people in those communities exercise as part of their day-to-day routine through walking to transit, using transit, then walking from their next stop to their destinations. They build exercise into their everyday activities, and this really helps with a public health. And it's a big part of what is the livable community of the future. So what are the key elements of a livable community? environment first, absolutely. The climate change lens and protection of the environment has got to be the #1 filter that almost everything is judged against in the next while, or it's going to be irrelevant. Well-designed walkable urban spaces that foster interaction within the community. Livable communities are also communities where people interact, that they're out in the street, that there's an opportunity to talk, to get to know your neighbor. You're not driving into your 2-car garage, closing the door, going inside, and the only time you meet your neighbor is when you're out shoveling snow. And even that, with climate change, we may not have snow to shovel. So we've got to start creating communities that provide opportunities for interaction. Communities that are livable are really focused, the planning is focused on transit and active transportation. Housing and employment opportunities for everyone in the community at all stages of their lives is so critical. And with all of that and bringing it together, it's enhancing the quality of life. We don't want to be in a situation where the vast majority of people in the community hop in their cars in the morning, commute an hour and a half somewhere, come back after driving an hour and a half back, are tired, pick up some crap at a restaurant that just fast food. Sorry for fast food restaurant owners, I apologize for that. But you know, this isn't what we want for our community, is to have a lifestyle that's based on that. There's all kinds of opportunities, but when you become the bedroom community, it's extremely tough. And some of this, what brings it all together is partnerships and partnerships and partnerships within the community. And I have to tell you, I went looking for a couple of pictures early on when I was preparing this, and I came upon a presentation I did in 2002. And with a few minor changes, you just got it. We know what the right answers are. We've known for 20 years what the right answers are. And thankfully, in the region of Waterloo, we've raised the bar over the last 20 years, and councils have supported initiatives that make sense, that are moving us in the right direction. But you know what? Why you're here today is we need all of you to make sure that not only does that continue, but that you in fact push the councils to start raising the bar further, especially around climate change. And just to give you a sense that they're not all big, difficult things that have to be done to have dramatic impacts. When I actually did this presentation, prepared in 2002, I went out with my camera on a Sunday afternoon looking for just some pictures. And lo and behold, I found a couple subdivisions in Kitchener on a Sunday afternoon about 4 o'clock. And I thought I was in a car parking lot for a while. And it's unbelievable, the type of automobile parking that a lot of our residential areas have become. And then I went around a corner, and literally this is 2 blocks away, and I come upon this. And my first reaction is, oh my God, these people have no friends. But in fact, what you realize is there's the same number of cars. They're just dealt differently through the urban design. And in fact, with a relatively small change, a developer can change something that will ultimately look like this, assuming we don't help people get out of their cars, but they become something like this. And this is a lot more of a livable urban environment. Now, that example was automobiles. I used it because it's a good example. Small changes can have big impact. So just in summing up, maybe in the end, a livable community is best defined as a place we all want to live in. And I think certainly other presenters here are going to give you information on how you can help all of us achieve that goal, especially through the next election and afterwards. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thanks a lot, Kevin. Okay, our next speaker is Suzanne Carrajerbilian. Suzanne made the leap from working in the corporate sector in the US to the environmental sector with her move to Canada in 2008. After working in energy conservation on demand-side management projects, she moved to an operational role, utilizing her analytical background and corporate experience to help deliver outcomes more effectively. At Environmental Defense, she oversees the internal operations and leads the public engagement strategy. Suzanne serves on the board of the Sustainability Network as the current chair, and tonight Suzanne will be speaking about why individual engagement is important and how it can make a difference in the political process. Take it away, Suzanne.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Nith Valley Eco Boosters, for inviting me to be on this panel. I will share my screen. Okay. So as mentioned, I work for Environmental Defense. We are a policy, education, and awareness building organization. And my role specifically deals with engaging the public, understanding the public needs, and understanding what type of messaging and activities will mobilize Ontarians and Canadians in order to take action, all in the pursuit of securing environmental protections and a safer, greener future for all of us living in this province. Today, I want to focus this evening on one of our key initiatives in Ontario called Ontario Yours to Protect, which was an initiative of organizations that came together in response to the environmental rollbacks that started enabling more sprawl, paving away our farmland, aggregate operations threatening our water supplies, and industry operations threatening endangered species. In this initiative, the EDC embarked on a more grassroots local organizing support and worked with communities across Ontario. And we keep working to showcase the power that on-the-ground organizing can have just in securing success in the policy arena. For the past 4 years, the Yours to Protect team has been focusing on creating the space and the opportunity needed for communities to find the support, to get their messages amplified, to develop messaging, to gain access to media, to have access to unbranded collateral so that they can share with their supporters. In the current adversarial political environment, we figured with the lack of any positive GR initiatives, we should start doing an on-the-ground game in a more focused way, which is not something that EDC used to embark on previously. We are more of a policy working with government type of organization. But as we all know, with the more adversarial government trying to roll back all environmental protections, we needed to change the model. So through Yours to Protect, we started working more closely with local groups, Indigenous groups, residents, other NGOs, and started engaging on key policy proposals for mass communication through the media, picking signature local fights where we can assist with the public organizing, supporting grassroots organizations in their mobilization efforts, and also mobilizing EDC supporters to take action. The first case study that I just want to walk us through is the Stop Bill 66 campaign. The Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act was introduced in late December 2018. And it would have allowed for development proposals right inside the Greenbelt, Oak Ridges Moraine, Lake Simcoe, the watershed, and the areas around. So understanding that we don't have a lot of political power here to work with the government, we should mobilize on the ground. And stopping Schedule 10 of this bill became our priority. And we started focusing our efforts on introducing a community-led engagement. So with Stop Bill 66 campaign, EDC together with the 150 members of the OGA and other local partners, we identified 12 key regions within the Greenbelt and the vicinity to launch targeted community actions to demonstrate public support in opposition to Bill 66 and specifically to Schedule 10, which was the problematic schedule within this bill. In each of these key regions, our partners and us had activities, including organizing knowledge transfer and sharing workshops where all the groups came together. The first one was close to 200 people, where we developed messaging together, we shared organizing tips and tools, and strengthened the partnership among the different groups that previously maybe did not work together or have a relationship. Through the network developed at the workshop, we conducted, many of us, door-to-door outreach to local residents. We produced and distributed non-branded toolkits and collateral material to support local groups that were otherwise financially be inhibited. In doing so, helped coordinate and promote MPP calling, specifically to conservative MPPs, and letter to the editor campaigns to mobilize the general public and get a voice within the media space, whether it's local or the larger newspapers. A couple of months later, actually less than 2 months later, in January 2019, the Ontario government walked back on the Schedule 10 from the bill. And the outcome, which I think primarily was from caucus nervousness around their constituents of opposing this schedule vehemently. MPPs raised concerns after hearing back from thousands of people, seeing rallies in front of their constituency offices, reading stories in the media. And they relayed this nervousness to government, and the schedule was removed from the bill. The outcome validated our thinking that even in a non-friendly, development interest-centric government, if the people speak out with support, governments could yield. However, as we all know, the attack on Ontario's environment did not end there. Fast forward 2022, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing grants a minister's zoning order in MZO to allow Durham Live to pave over 57 acres of provincially significant wetland in Pickering. Lower Duffins Creek wetland, which is a vital sensitive wetland area between Ajax and Pickering, becomes the face of this fight. If allowed to proceed, 50% of the wetland complex will be filled in to accommodate a massive warehouse development. Frankly, a warehouse that could have been built anywhere else. However, the story unfolded that obviously the developer paid for this land in pittance because it is a land that shouldn't have been developed under the planning process and the rules. However, having friends in government enabled government to pass an MZO to circumvent these rules. And now the developer stands to make windfall profits on this project. So local residents were outraged because this wasn't critical for an MZO to be issued. So they galvanized, we supported them along with many other ENGOs that got involved to help. There was also a court issue here with this MZO not having any merit. However, the government, to circumvent this and under the guise of leading us through a COVID-19 and the impacts on the economy, introduced another bill in the Budget Measures Act, which would strip the conservation authorities of their oversight and remove important safeguards that serve to balance the need for economic development and environmental protection, and in a way so that they could then justify this MZO, which could have not stand in court. Very quickly, CBC broke the news that Amazon is the corporation building that warehouse complex or behind this project. And with massive pressure from dedicated local activists, indigenous groups, environmental organizations, tens of thousands of people taking action by writing to their local MPPs, calling MPPs, writing letters to the TRCA, as well as other authorities through email or writing tools or petition software that larger NGOs or other smaller NGOs make available. Amazon abandoned its plans because the negative PR was just too much, and there was really no need for Amazon to build specifically on that wetland. They could have gone anywhere else. So they abandoned, and with all the massive outcry and mobilizing, government also took that part out of the MZO, and the wetlands became protected again. This wouldn't have happened without local residents' outcry and mobilization, and then people around them, NGOs, indigenous groups, basically supporting that mobilization, and media picking up the story, and the TVO had the great, basically, timeline of everything that had happened, and then a win again ensued. Again, showing us even in very difficult times where we think something is set in stone and government passes rules and legislation, bills to protect themselves, local residents can still mobilize and be heard and secure a win. Another thing that currently is happening across the province are stopping sprawl efforts by developers, basically through councils, trying to expand urban boundaries, which does not bode well for the majority of the cities and the municipalities involved. And groups like EDC and others who have planning and legal expertise have been working with local groups who have organized people power on the ground. In two cases with Halton Region and Hamilton, EDC specifically has worked with groups on the ground there, and NGOs leading this effort. And they were able to push back on the developer outreach that was being done to influence the outcome of that vote. And both in Halton and Hamilton, the vote came out at zero boundary expansion, which was a great win. And obviously Waterloo region leads the way with a much progressive planning for the region. So what to expect this fall, and what is it that we can do collectively? As we know, the municipal elections are coming up. In the most recent provincial election, the turnout was historically low. Reasons for this could be due to distrust in elected officials, despair, burnout, for all of us having lived through 2 years of COVID and through very challenging times. And right now, with soaring inflation and cost of living woes, Ontarians have a lot on their mind, and voting might not be at top of the list. However, it is important to remind ourselves that municipal leaders hold a lot of influence in key issues that can impact our day-to-day concerns. For example, preventing sprawl, encouraging gentle density to secure affordable housing, freezing urban boundary expansions, protecting the natural areas that we rely on for food and water and for our mental health, and taking action in the face of the climate emergency, just to name a few. So it is critical for us to get engaged in the municipal election. And at the local level, a few hundred votes can actually make a difference. And we have seen these in other elections, where a riding basically changes leaders based on a few hundred people that voted, and that would be the margin of the win. So I would encourage everyone to exercise this right and encourage others around us to participate, our neighbors, our coworkers, because with a few hundred votes, we could ensure that we have leaders in place that have a vision for this province that is better than what is going on now, that it is not for profit, but more being built for the people. For the tools of how you can engage, if you have issues in your own communities, or if you want to organize, or if you want to engage personally, the Yours to Protect website has a lot of resources. It's a living website, we keep adding to it. A lot of residents, local groups contribute to it, where we have tips, videos, and tools around how to meet with your NPP, how to get ready to call your representative if you wanted to organize using digital tools. We have case studies, for example, from Hamilton, Ontario on local organizing, and some other election win stories. And if you have any other questions around organizing, specific tactics that you were thinking of, please reach out to me, and either I would have the tool or I can find you the tool or the guidance for it. And thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, our next speaker is Tim Van Hinty. Tim has nearly 20 years of professional planning experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors in Ontario, New Brunswick, British Columbia, and the Yukon. In 2005, Tim received a master's degree in resource and environmental management from Simon Fraser University, where he specialized in collaborative land use planning and environmental impact assessment. He has co-authored major reports on oil and gas development and impact assessment for the Coastal First Nations Turning Point Initiative in Vancouver. Tim spent 10 years as a regional planner for the Region of Waterloo and is currently the Director of Planning at the Township of Wellesley. He recently returned from the Yukon, where he helped develop the first ever draft regional plan for the Dawson region with the Yukon government and First Nations. Tonight, Tim will be helping us to understand the municipal planning process and how to get engaged in that process and influence decision-making in our communities. Take it away, Tim.
Thanks everyone for your patience. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Tim Van Hinty. I'm the Director of Planning in the Township of Wellesley. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the municipal planning process, becoming engaged and providing input. Go ahead, please. Thanks. So planning can sometimes feel like this little girl who's drinking from a fire hose. And I hope you don't feel like that about planning. And I hope that after my presentation, you'll feel a little bit less like that. But it can be confusing. There's a lot of ins and outs. And what I want to speak about tonight is certainly first, what is public participation? Followed by an overview of planning in Ontario, very high level, and give you an example of how public participation is kind of viewed in the Planning Act when you're dealing with official plans. Some ideas on how to get engaged and provide input, and then just a few closing thoughts, some reflections. So next slide. Thank you. So what is public participation? Often we talk about it, but it exists on a spectrum. And I stole this from the International Association for Public Participation. I've taken a couple courses. They're a great organization to look into, a lot of resources there. But it ranges from, informing the public on one end to, at the very other end, empowering the public and putting the decision in the hands of the public. And if you look at on the left-hand side there, the public participation goal when you're informing is basically to provide the public with a balanced and objective information to assist them in understanding the problem, alternatives, opportunities. And the promise there is, well, we will keep you informed. So that's the basic level of public participation that we see in planning processes. But as you move farther to the right, you can see that the involvement of the public gets greater and greater, and the impact of the decisions is also a lot more important. And so I would say in Ontario that generally in the planning process, we're somewhere, in 1, 2, and 3, inform, consult, involve. To really get to the collaborate and empower, it seems to be quite challenging, unless it's cemented in in law or in some type of agreement. I'll give you an example. Up in the Yukon, where I just came from, the planning, regional planning there is done kind of in a more collaborative, empowering type way, because they have final agreements. 11 of the 14 First Nations have final agreements. And it's written right in there that the power of drafting these plans is in the hands of citizen commissions. And I'll talk about that a little bit more a little later. Next slide, please. So this is the fire hose slide. I'm not, there's a lot of information on this slide, so I hope you don't feel like you're drinking from the fire hose, but you don't need to capture everything here. But the point here is that planning in Ontario really exists in a type of hierarchy, and at the top you have provincial statutes or provincial laws. Obviously, the Places to Grow Act, the Planning Act, Greenbelt Act. I'm sure you've heard about those. And from those statutes flows provincial policies. So things like the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, those types of things. And once the province sets that direction, municipal official plans are required to conform to those. And so In the municipal environment, you really have two types of situations. One is if there's a single tier municipality like the city of Toronto or the city of Hamilton, where there's only one municipality. Whereas in the region of Waterloo, we have a two-tier system, as I'm sure you're aware, where you have an upper tier municipality, the region of Waterloo, and lower tier municipalities, in my case, the Township of Wellesley. So those flow from the provincial policies. And then you get into implementing those policies. And there's a number of land use control instruments you can use. Probably the most familiar to you might be subdivision control, consents, zoning bylaws for sure. You probably hear my dog in the background. That's the fun part of doing a presentation at home in the evening. And site plans, MZOs certainly are very controversial these days. But those are just some of the implementation tools that we use to try and implement the official plans and ultimately, I guess, the provincial statutes. Next slide, please. So just a quick example, official plans when considering an official plan, and this is from the Planning Act. A council must ensure that at least one public meeting is held, and it needs to be 20 days notice for that public meeting, typically through standard ways, newspapers, emails, websites, those types of things. But if you're doing a statutory official plan update, much like what the Region of Waterloo is currently going through, typically you'll see a special council meeting, an open house information session, and at least one public meeting in advance of that special council meeting, and that's also stipulated in the Act. And of course, adequate information, including a copy of the plan, must be made available to the public well in advance of the public meeting. Now, that's more or less what the Planning Act says, and that's really the minimum standard. Typically, you don't see an official plan process going only through the minimum standard. Most OP process, or I would argue most good, robust OP processes would go well beyond that and include multiple engagement opportunities. So at different times of the day, different places, online, in person, when COVID allows. That's typically what you're seeing across the Greater Golden Horseshoe right now. Next slide, please. So becoming engaged in planning, this is a picture I was talking about, the Yukon. This is a picture from Dawson City, the downtown hotel in Dawson City. Feels like a long time ago, but this is the Dawson Regional Planning Commission at one of our working sessions. And so when I talked about collaborating and empowering in the final agreement of the Trondikwachian First Nation, they're actually mandated to appoint a citizen-led commission, and each government, the Trondikwachian and the Yukon government, jointly agree on the 6 citizens that ultimately direct and write the draft plan. I mean, as staff, we wrote the draft plan, but they directed us on how best to do that. And so I think becoming engaged in planning, I mean, this was the toughest slide to write, because you really need a passion. You need to dig into it, and I think the best way to do that is maybe ask yourself a series of questions. And what makes your community great, or what could be improved? What makes an awesome street? There's some really interesting things that are going on in landscape architecture and streetscape design, closing off streets and making them more livable and thriving. What about inclusivity? Is your community inclusive of different backgrounds, income levels, and cultures? Is that something that you see in your neighborhood, in your community, in your city? What's missing? What's missing in your neighborhood? Is it affordable housing? Is it parks? Is it open space? Is it places for citizens to get together and run into each other, like Mr. Eby mentioned earlier before? And who have you talked to about those ideas? Do you keep them to yourself? Do you just talk to 1 or 2 neighbors, or do you talk do you talk about it often with really different types of people that you meet in your neighborhood? So just some questions to maybe ask yourself on how better to be engaged in planning. Next slide, please. So providing input, just a few bullets here. I'm sure that a few people touched on some of these before tonight, and certainly learning as much as you can about a proposal or a policy change is important. and thinking about how it'll affect you, but not just you, but your community or your neighborhood. That's important too, because it's not just me or you or 2 or 3 people. It's thinking about how it would affect others as well. Certainly talk to your neighbors and hear different perspectives, but like I said before, extend the umbrella. Go beyond maybe people that you would typically talk to get different perspectives. And certainly going to public meetings, open houses, information sessions, and letting council know what you think. I mean, that's ultimately they're the decision makers on a lot of this stuff. And as planners, we're certainly their staff, and we recommend what we think is best. But ultimately, councilors are the final decision makers on a lot of this stuff. Certainly, writing your council member, but also working with council municipal staff on a way forward when you come to a roadblock. I think that's really important. It's certainly challenging work, but we do our best to work with people to give us a call and voice their concerns. So next slide, please. At this point, people normally ask me, how many more slides do you have, Tim? And the answer is a couple. So this is picture, well, maybe you don't want to picture me sitting on a beach looking at my kids bob up and down in Lake Huron, but sometimes I think about planning when I'm sitting on the beach, and I often think about a few things that maybe happened in the week or the month before and how I could do that better. But just a couple of things. When you're coming to a discussion or a meeting or an engagement, try and come to it from a good place. If you're having a bad day, like certainly passion is good. Bringing passion forward in some of these issues is really critical, but anger and outrage are not really that effective communication tools. So just something to think about. Keeping an open mind instead of a fixed mindset. Often we go into things and we think, yeah, I know the answer, and this is the way that I think it should be, and I know that my wife often thinks about that when I come into conversations. So just keeping an open mindset. Maybe there's something that we didn't think about, or maybe that you didn't think about, that might be a good solution to things. And the last one is certainly there's no question that planners, and I don't want to say planners, you could insert anything here, public health officials, teachers, educators, you name it. We're experiencing unprecedented workloads, specifically in the municipal environment. We're having staffing issues, difficulty getting people to apply for positions, which is fairly unprecedented. And we're also dealing with some of these wicked challenges. I mean, let's start at the top. Climate change, reconciliation, affordable housing. I'm sure we could name half a dozen to a dozen more. And so, we're doing our best to work through some of these things, and we don't have all the answers. And I think that the partnerships line is a great one to try and work on these things, because no one discipline is going to solve it on their own. Next slide. Oh, it is the last slide. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Okay, next up is, sorry, just let me close this. So yes, our next speaker is Kevin Thomason. Kevin is a passionate defender of the environment and has been active for years on the Ontario Greenbelt, the European Greenbelt, and numerous local Waterloo region protections, such as environmentally sensitive landscapes designation, protected countryside and countryside line. Kevin is vice chair of the Grand River Environmental Network, a co-founder of Smart Growth Waterloo Region, and past president of Ontario Nature. Oh, sorry, let me just stop sharing my screen here.
Excellent.
Sorry, Kevin, where was I? Past president of Ontario Nature. He sits on the steering committee of the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance and is also involved with the Youth Challenge International and Médecins Sans Frontières. Sorry, my French is very bad. Kevin has worked on the technology and marketing fields and co-founded a leading startup acquired by Google. Kevin continues to coach and mentor a number of technology, green tech, and clean tech startups, sits on a number of board of directors, and when not traveling, you can find him relaxing with his wife and 2 young children at his log cabin in the woods in Sunfish Lake just outside Waterloo. Kevin's topic tonight, how to create a movement and rally your community. All right, take it away, Kevin.
Excellent. Wow. Well, thank you. Tough act to follow tonight with so many good presentations. Let me just get my presentation up and going here. And hopefully if you can confirm that you can see my slides on a screen there.
Yep, we can see him.
Excellent. Fantastic. Okay, great. So tonight I'm going to talk about how to create a movement and rally your community. And a lot of this is going to be based on my own personal experiences. And we all know that the best communities have resulted from engaged and collaborative people and participative processes. But how do you get involved? How do you create a movement, and how do you rally a community to achieve these optimal solutions or outcomes? From my own experience, about 30 years ago, I bought a home in an amazing natural area, Sunfish Lake, as we just heard, in Wilmot Township. But then I watched horrified as nearby forests were being clear cut and wetlands bulldozed, and decided need to speak up about this. So I attended my first council meeting. And after I got there, I realized that you actually had to book to appear as a delegation. I didn't even know what a delegation was. I was just kind of by myself. I wasn't a whole entourage of people or anything like that. But I started to do some research on the internet. I teamed up with some similarly concerned neighbors, and we started to move forward. The second and next presentations went better. I had a written speech. I practiced it and timed it in advance. I had printouts for council, 10 to 30 copies, depending on the council and the size. I got used to the podium and the microphone system and really started to learn. And over time, learned to become more effective and more impactful. Tried to make it more multimedia presentations. Figured if they didn't want to listen to me speak, they could at least enjoy the photos I was showing or learn from other things. And also learn things that maps and diagrams can be extremely helpful. A picture truly is worth 1,000 words. And also the importance of visuals and photos. Literally hundreds of photos can be shown in a backdrop. And there's been times where I've just been doing a spoken presentation where I've just had a slideshow of photos going on in the background. And then again, even pictures from others can add interest to your presentations. And one of the most brilliant things that we did early in the process, we actually reached out to a camera club and a photography group saying, hey, we need photos of this particular area, and we need you to be looking for these particular species or these particular animals. And actually turned out to be fantastic. Not only have we gotten thousands of great photos from them, but they've discovered species that we never even knew existed there, rare or endangered species or such. So there's lots of ways to use visuals and multimedia to make presentations more effective. Other things to be effective at council is to research the issues and the proposals. As I say, have a prepared presentation and printouts for people. Practice in the empty council chambers in advance. And this is a key one. Every council chamber in our region and across the province I've been to has been quite different. Some you stand in front, some you stand behind, some you sit, some you have a microphone, others you just talk to the room. It really varies, but it's a great opportunity for you to time and test your presentation. Get to know the council clerks. Not only can they be really important to make sure your presentation goes well, but they can carry huge influence, even just being able to get on the agenda at the first place, or sometimes even just being notified that something is coming up at a meeting. The clerks can be tremendously influential and impactful. And there's other things you can do too. You can work to seed questions with supportive counselors that allow you to get more information across than just your allotted time. There's lots of different ways that you can work to be more effective at a council presentation or a council delegation, as it's officially called. And it's not just council. Make sure you can leverage the media too. And developing savvy with the media is something that's taken time, but just simple little things. Having printouts for the media in advance. If there's actually reporters at the event, it's all there, and they're not having to furiously try to make notes while you're presenting. You can get to know reporters in advance. and build rapport with them. And that's really important. Arrange to meet them out in the hallway afterwards for any questions or specific quotes they'd be after, or better yet, get to know them firsthand or offer them a tour to the area, or a chance to get to know your issue or topic more firsthand. And it's been amazing to see how these contacts and impact with the media plays out, sometimes even years later. It's never underestimate the ability or the importance of good communications. Aim for emotion in presentations. Certainly it's more powerful than logic and more memorable. And a story or a speech can be far more impactful and really hard for our opponents to counter. And I think this is one of the things, the lucky things, as environmentalists, and I think most of the people on this call come from the environmental community, we're actually the people often with the great photos. It's hard for developers to show, photos of bulldozed forests or clear-cut areas or such. We're the ones who can show, the photos of nature and fields and water and what needs to be protected. But then again, our stories and speeches, we can be really impactful. And, these are the things that then again will resonate with other citizens, resonate with the media, or really just help to sway votes. Just some other etiquette, don't present and then leave. Make sure you stay for the duration of your topic, even if it's a virtual meeting. Often the discussion and debate afterwards can be very insightful, emotional, and even entertaining, particularly if it's coming to a vote that night and the councillors are deliberating or trying to state why they are taking a particular approach or stance on things. And then also ensure a recorded vote. It's great to be able to refer back to on future years who voted what way and why, or even help to remind them come election time on how they voted one way or another that they may not be as proud of in hindsight or may have to try to defend at some point in the future. I think it's also important to have, yes.
Kevin, sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not moving.
Oh, my slides aren't moving. Okay, let me stop sharing and restart sharing, and thank you for that. Let's go like this, and I will try sharing screen again, and there we go. So hopefully you have a slide before you saying ensure recorded vote, and now you have a slide and saying have a bigger vision. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. Okay, good. Don't know what happened to the slide share, but something hiccuped along the way there. But anyways, it's important to have a bigger vision. Think beyond your immediate issue. Not everyone's going to be as passionate about things as you are or as engaged in your pet cause. And I think it's often important to find a larger goal that everyone will be inspired by. And, for example, about the Greenbelt, some people are really excited about the water aspects or the farmland aspects, endangered species or connectivity. There's a lot of different angles that can be played to help to ensure that people are aware of what the issues are, but also what's most interesting to them or what they're most concerned about, or likewise, even what's a 30-year community vision, and how do we create a sustainable world-class community, and then always make sure you circle back to your big picture and vision and goal, and remind people of why it is working towards what you're working towards. However, it's important to remember that council is just theater. Every councillor usually knows how they're going to vote prior to most meetings, often sometimes weeks in advance. Often councillors will even plan out how the vote is going to go, who will introduce what, are they going to bring any friendly amendments or motions or anything like that, and how it's all going to play out. And we have to realize we're all just actors in a drama. But that said, it's important that we're there. We all have roles to play, and part of our role is often being there to speak up, to ensure that it gets carried by the media, to ensure there is a voice. And very occasionally there's a brave councillor listening to delegations and willing to try to make a motion or a friendly amendment. But really, there's a fear of mistakes, the pain of trying to draft legal copy by committee in front of the public. There's a lot of reasons why councillors will often be hesitant, no matter how many good points you bring up, to suddenly try to change things on the fly. So because of that, it's important to get to know counselors and staff and work in advance with them on things and work with them on the research and report long before they go to council. I think there's been times we've started to work on issues we know we're coming 3 or 4 years in advance of it actually coming forward on council. And that's great, because then suddenly you can help to set the terms of reference and ensure they're doing the proper background studies and things like that. So make sure you know both the municipal as well as regional staff, even other folks like external consultants or the GRCA. It can be really time consuming, but very effective. And there's lots of things to get involved in, be it meetings or open houses, field visits, or even just reaching out and having staff out to see things firsthand. Likewise, working with the counselors in advance is really important. We often complain about developers whining and dining counselors and taking them out to fancy golf courses and things like that. We might not have fancy golf club memberships or things like that. But that said, we can still meet up for them for breakfast at a local dive, or have them for a cup of coffee somewhere, or even just take them for a walk in the woods. And it's really important to get to know them and where they stand on issues, and make sure that there's a good rapport there. You can really anticipate where things are going to go and work with councils on the motion that you would like to see introduced, and then find out where the resistance is going to come and what it would take to change that. And I think it's important that we're proposing solutions and not just complaining. It's not satisfactory to say we don't like a development or we don't want things. I think more importantly, the question is what are we proposing instead, or how can we come up with something that's actually more compelling, so compelling that it's the obvious path forward and is just so much better than whatever it is we're up against or opposing. And I think one of the important things is don't assume that councillors, even the mayor, has ever visited or even have a clue about what you're talking about or where you've been, and that even the mayor hasn't been to every single park in the city or every single part of the city. I've done perhaps hundreds of Moraine 101 tours where we bring these people actually out for a hike in the woods, and then never underestimate the importance of maps and photos and just getting people out in the field. In fact, you can see in the photo here a bunch of people standing in a tall grass prairie where the grass is actually taller than they are, which interestingly was a first-time experience for most of these people. Most people are used to invasive species of grasses, not the natives. For longer term, and we really need to make sure we've got a long-term focus. As I mentioned, work with staff on the master plans, the regional official plans, the district plans, and that, because those are often where a lot of the groundwork is laid for decades in advance. We need to ensure that we're being proactive, not reactive. No more chasing ambulances, chasing bulldozers. By the time a bulldozer appeared on the site, you're likely years too late to have changed anything. And so it's really important that you meet regularly with the counselors, even if you have no issues, even if you don't think there's anything to talk about, still have that regular rapport and dialogue. And I think even looking at something that's quite timely now with a municipal election in full swing, we really need to work in advance to make sure that you've got the right people to work with, and don't underestimate the importance of that electioneering, getting to know the candidates, getting to know the people who you want to see elected, and push to make sure there's no developer campaign funding. It's absolutely disturbing to see the impact that some developer-led councils have around the province, and let's try to ensure a clear slate, and challenge councillors or mayors or people who are running to reject any sort of developer campaign funding. So really the goal is no surprises. And that can come through regularly reading local newspapers. In fact, most of our local newspapers wouldn't exist if they didn't have a council to report on. In some areas like where we live, if you're like me near a boundary, I live very close to the boundary for Wellesley, Woolwich, Wilmot, and Waterloo. So it means that I've got 4 newspapers to read each week and 4 different councils to try to keep up on. It can be a little much at times, but on the other hand, it's all part of that being proactive. And make sure to watch for the council meeting agendas. Usually every Friday they come out and they're posted. There's often a lot of surprises in them. So you have to be prepared to change your weekend plans and often delegate on Monday or Tuesday on very short notice. So the importance of creating alliances and collaborating can't be overstated. Really working together with others to accomplish your goals in community is key. But don't feel that you actually have to have a big formal group. You know, sometimes it's just a group of coordinated individuals that I've seen that have been the most impactful. And you know, sometimes by not creating a formal group with all the overhead of a formal group of trying to create a charter and elect a president and fundraise and all those sort of things, you can actually put all your time and energy into the cause that's needed rather than into the overhead of forming a group. And in fact, often, you know, strategies with the developers themselves or opponents can be to get these groups infighting and have the group so focused on their own issues that they have no time to actually you know, oppose or advocate for what's needed. So sometimes just a group of coordinated individuals can be far more effective. So don't underestimate what a small determined group of people can do or can accomplish. And so don't underestimate too how unusual some of the alliances can be. For example, with the rapid transit, the LRT, MZOs, or even the regional official plan, we've seen developers and farmers and students and environmentalists and tech companies all working together towards these same causes. And it's been pretty impressive actually to see some of these alliances and teams that have formed to help move the needle and get things to where they need to be. So don't underestimate, an opponent one time might be your partner the next time. And don't forget to work at all levels, even with local issues. It's important to keep the federal members of parliament or the provincial MPPs involved and engaged, regional councillors as well. Don't even overlook cabinet ministers or premiers or prime ministers. It's all really important. And if you've got that larger overarching vision for your community or neighborhood or area, often it's easy to engage them in that overall vision and show how whatever issue at hand relates to that. And finally, don't forget to use all the available tools. And this is getting so much easier now with more easy to use and low cost or even free tools that are available through technology, be it Zoom for online meetings or conference calls, email or MailChimp for communications, Slack or other tools similar to it for collaboration between people, and even things like Nation Builder for campaign management and coordination of everything. So there's lots of things evolving on the tools and technology front. So overall, you can find lots of different ways to create the movement and the impact that you need, and hopefully rally your community to get that vision that we've heard others like Kevin Eby and such talk about, of that incredible, desirable, livable community that we'd all want to be a part of. So any questions or such, I think I'll turn things back over and we'll move forward.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kevin. All the panelists can feel free to turn their videos on and their mics on. We're going to begin the question and answer session for tonight. Quick reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. And just before we get started with the Q&A, did any of our speakers, after listening to all the presentations tonight, did you have any other comments, anything to add on your own presentation, or anything you would like to, a question you would like to ask another speaker? I see Kevin's hand up.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that Kevin almost went to in his presentation that I think is really critical, Kevin and another gentleman named Mark Reeser, who's with our Federation of Agriculture, when I was the Director of Community Planning, what made their presentations absolutely so valuable to everybody was the fact that they recognized that participating, if you were an environmentalist focus, or in Mark's case, a farmer concerned about farmland, one of the key ways to ensure the farmland is neatened up in the Region of Waterloo was supporting the LRT. And so all of a sudden we had environmentalists and farmers in council speaking about something that's happening in the downtown. And at first people scratched their heads. and wondered why. But in fact, it was so effective because these are people that are looking at not just their little part of the world, they're looking at how the rest of the world affects their part. And when something made sense, they were there to support it, and they gave the councillors backing when they needed it to do bold things, because it spoke to they spoke to the broader community, and that is so, so important.
Yeah, excellent point, Kevin. And you know, it always kind of amazed me or surprised me that I had to become an urban planner in order to be an environmentalist. And it wasn't until I'm standing there in the chaos of downtown Bangkok, looking at a monorail as I'm trying to figure out how does Waterloo Region build an LRT, knowing that we're only going to get one chance to do it right. And in the end, I visited 34 different cities around the world studying LRT systems, trying to figure out how we get LRT right on the first try, looking at the failed ones that have had a ton of challenge like Athens, or they're incredibly successful ones like Strasbourg. But you're right, it was kind of ironic that in order to protect the environment, we had spent a lot of time on the urban and how do we create a really compelling, desirable city.
Yep.
It's really interesting, Kevin. What would you say from your experience studying the LRTs? What makes a really great LRT system and what makes one fail?
Yeah, excellent question. And I think Kevin Eby touched on this in his presentation, and that is the importance of transit. You know, Strasbourg is a perfect parallel to Waterloo Region because it's 600,000 people, the same as Waterloo Region. But they were very clear that their LRT didn't really hit its stride until they had built the fourth line, and that it took 4 separate LRT routes crisscrossing the city. They now have 7 different lines in Strasbourg, but they said, you know, it took that level of connectivity. The other thing it did was they also built hundreds of kilometers of cycling trails at the same time, and then encouraged people to bring their bikes onto the LRT. And that addressed the question of, well, how do I get to the LRT, or how do I get from the LRT? And so they realized that they really needed this integrated solution, that just building any one piece wasn't going to be enough. And I think that's how, you know, how do we look at our community as a whole and how things function in an integrated manner and ensure we're firing on all cylinders and coming up with all the needed pieces and not just some components.
That's great. Yeah, Kevin, since you were touching on the LRTs as well, do you have anything to add there?
I've got some. I think one of the things that we missed in the LRT in Waterloo was the urban design around the system. The public-private partnership really, the tender was too wide open, and so it's funny. They want to go to public-private partnerships because they can deliver it on time, on cost, and that it can be innovative, and they want the wide ability to be innovative. What we didn't realize, I think, I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but we didn't realize what innovative meant was cheap. And yes, if you're doing the maintenance on it for 30 years, concrete everything around the station, concrete everything, because you don't have any maintenance to do. And so, you know, we made some mistakes. They're repairable. There are certainly things that we can resolve. There are things that we can continue to do. But I want to say one thing about Kevin. Kevin and I have worked together an awful lot. I would have hired him in a flash, except we needed him on the outside more than we needed him on staff. But you know, the reality is, if you're really going to have an impact, and I'm sure Tim would say this as well in the experiences he's had, is get to know the issues. It takes time. Get to know the planners. The best, the people who have the most impact are the people that can talk to the staff respectfully, talk to the councillors respectfully, understand all sides of the issues, and recognize that there's no perfect answer. And the LRT is a good example of that. you know, as a planner, you know you've hit the mark when everybody's a little bit mad at you. And quite often that's success. Success is measured by the phone calls you don't get, which means you never know. Except, like I say, if everybody's a little bit mad at you, you've probably hit the mark. So.
Well, and excellent points, Kevin. And I would say the opportunity with LRT is really trying to figure out where to go from here. And, you know, we should not just be working on phase 2 to Cambridge, but phase 3, which thankfully was included into the east-west, into the regional official plan. But I would even challenge is now is when we should be planning where phases 4 and 5 go. And, you know, how do those play into the community? How do we build and expand that? And more importantly, the LRT we built for everyone. And so, you know, where are those opportunities from the people for the rural townships to get on the LRT? Because sadly, we haven't built parking lots at, you know, some of the more distant stations at Blockline or Northfield or whatever. You know, I look, for example, in the north, and, you know, my Sobeys has a driving shed. My liquor store has a driving shed. My Home Depot has a driving shed. And the Mennonites often will come in and park their horse and buggies there. And yet we know the Mennonites need to access the hospitals in the core. Where's the driving shed at the Northfield station for those folks in St. Jacobs and Elmira to easily get there? There is huge potential to make this far more compelling and accessible to not only just the residents of St. Jacobs and Elmira, but even, you know, some of our rural residents and others. So I think there's just a ton of opportunity here to really, you know, continue to improve upon these things and build that great livable community.
Yeah, I see your hand up there, Tim, so go ahead and make your comments. But I also had a question for you off of what Kevin was just saying there. Being the Director of Planning for the Township of Wellesley, you might be able to speak sort of to that in terms of how can we ensure that communities like the Mennonites are engaged as well?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, you know, like, you know, I'll give you an example. I have a minor variance application on my desk for you know, a Mennonite farm. They don't have, you know, email, right? You know, like you forget about some of these things. But, you know, I really think, and maybe touching on this a little bit from what the other guys were talking about is, you know, you know, the benefit of picking up the phone is something that we've, you know, got away from, you know, and sometimes some of these things can really be hashed out, or you can have a better understanding of people, where they're coming from, planners, you know, citizens, whoever, when you pick up the phone, have a telephone call, right? Like it's a bit of a lost art. You know, I wade through emails most of my day. I'm sure a lot of us do. Really hard to read tone. It's really hard to, you know, it's, you know, making a typo and putting the word "not" in, you know, somewhere is you know, really can change the entire email, you know. So I guess, you know, and I don't want my phone to light up tomorrow. I mean, maybe it will, right? But certainly you know, the communication piece is really key. And you know, a lot of people in Wellesley still come into the office, right? Not, you know, when the office was closed, that was a big thing during the pandemic. When people couldn't come into the office, you couldn't talk to them, even face to face, right? Telephone's the next best thing. But I was going to touch on the piece just about transit, and when we can't forget about the rural communities, you know, like it's, you know, the LRT is certainly fantastic. I live near in Waterloo, you know, but public transit, bringing public transit to the rural communities is a big challenge. And, you know, we're working on it out in Wellesley. We're trying different things, and I don't have really anything to report tonight, but it is on the radar. And to have that integrated community, I noticed in the Q&A, like, how do we speed up the transition from automobiles? We have to figure out a true interconnected region, where, you know, cities are important. It's the bulk of where the population is, no question. You know, trying to figure out how we make those connections out to the townships, you know, is a big one.
Awesome, thanks, Tim. And before we continue on with any more transportation-related discussion, Suzanne, I wanted to bring you in on that kind of a similar question that I asked Tim, just about how to engage with some communities that are maybe more difficult to engage with, or how could we as individuals ensure that we're bringing those people into the fold as well?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we struggled through that, to be honest, on some of our files, trying to get out of cities with communities that we know, or the communication style are similar. So you set up an email blast or social media, and people get to it because they know either EDC or large NGOs. But we tried different ways on our water file in the Lake Erie watershed. And the best model was to actually find someone within the community or communities, find champions and work with them, because they are more the trusted sources of information, versus me going from Toronto and saying, hey, you don't know me, I don't live here, but let me tell you what's good for you, kind of. And as much as we try, it's difficult to understand some of the concerns of different types of communities, whether they're demographic or socioeconomic. It's always good to get champions from that community that align on values with what we're trying to accomplish and work through them. And we tried that with our water file. We try it with our toxics file, where a lot of marginalized and BIPOC communities are impacted by what happens in those files. And that's been the more successful model. And similar now with like 413, with trying to stop an unnecessary highway. It is basically working with local groups on the ground. They're leading the fight. We support whichever way we can, whatever expertise we have. We are not in the lead, nor do we need to be the face of the fight. I mean, we can get media attention, so that's our strength. But on the local front, we work with communities because they can speak and they're the trusted messengers, way more than us.
Great, thank you. Tim?
Yeah, just building on that, it's a great point, Suzanne. It really is, like having local champions. Just my experience up in the Yukon, if you can imagine a middle-aged white man, moving his family up to the Yukon, to live in Whitehorse, but work on a plan in Dawson City. For the first little while, they were calling me the guy from Toronto, coming in. I've never lived in Toronto, but not that there's anything wrong with Toronto. It's the guy from Toronto coming in to, tell us what to do, and which wasn't my approach at all, right? It's a totally different model, and the Citizen Commission, the Planning Commission, I mean, they were the champions, right? I was just there as their assistant, really, not, guiding, recommending, but really they were the best experts. Maybe I knew something about planning, but certainly, I didn't know where the caribou go in October, right? So, that was an excellent point, Suzanne. I just thought that is a really good thing to highlight, is that, local people are the experts in you are the expert in your neighborhood, right? You don't have to have a planning degree, to be an expert.
Yeah, and sort of on that same vein then, this is just a question for the entire panel, so feel free to jump in. But during COVID, what strategies did you each find, either through your own participation or through projects that you were working on? What strategies did you find for public participation that worked? Which ones didn't? And what lessons do you think we can take carrying on as lots of people continue in the new hybrid work style?
Maybe I'll speak first. I thought I have found Zoom to be these types of webinars, Zoom opportunities, the ability to meet with a group of people without having to all come to one spot is a very good thing. Something like this can be 2 hours in length without an hour kind of diddling around on either side in order to get there, get home. That said, there's a downside to it as well. And Kevin and I attended a meeting not that long ago where it was the first one live in a while, and man, did that make a difference. Because, you know, as Tim was saying, you know, with emails, you can't read, you know, tone, you can't read that. You can't really do it on Zoom either, to some extent. And especially presenting sucks on Zoom. Being perfectly honest, you cannot read the audience. You have no idea whether the joke you just told fell totally flat and everybody is going, oh my God, you've got no ability to recover. You do, but there are really good things to Zoom that and these types of virtual meetings that we shouldn't lose, because they provide such an opportunity for outreach to people that may not otherwise be able to easily leave their home, maybe babysitting at night, may have physical disabilities that cause them problems, may not be able to afford an automobile to get to the meetings, no matter where we put them. And this opens up the opportunity for those types of people to participate. And I think it has opened up a broad opportunity that we can't lose. We can't depend on it, because there are many good things that come with getting together. The talk in the hallway outside the formal being one of the big ones. I don't know how many problems we've resolved when, after the fight in front of council, two of us stand out in the hallway and go, yeah, it makes total sense. And before I forget, I just want to say one thing, that one lesson that really doesn't do with this, but I want to make sure is said tonight. I have sat through so many presentations at council where people have come in with an issue, and after 5 minutes of their presentation, man, they've nailed it. They've won. Everybody's on side. And then for some reason, they seem to forget that councillors are people with feelings too. And they go at them like somehow they would be stupid if they didn't support them. And you just watch support just drift away. And I've seen that, I'll bet you 40, 50 times in my career, where if people just made their point, were respectful and stopped, they won issues. And instead they kept going, and away it went. So sorry, I just wanted to make sure that that's so important to recognize. The decision makers are people too. And you've got to treat them with that respect.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tim, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I was just going to echo that. I think Zoom, you know, I was in the Yukon for pretty much the entire pandemic, or at least the first couple of years, and it really changed the game, because we had an office in Whitehorse, so some of us were working in Whitehorse, whereas the commission was in Dawson City. So you're looking at a drive, you know, going to Ottawa every time you want to go and meet. And if the weather was good, we'd fly. So let's just talk about climate change for a second. And, you know, the amount of savings we can make, you know, on that type of travel is astounding. The other thing is that I thought it was good for meeting people. You know, we talk about meeting people where they're at, and I think we touched on that. You know, one of our citizen planning commission members was a placer miner, and you know, rightly or wrongly, he was a placer miner, and he would be stuck out at camp if we, you know, if we had meetings. Sometimes we got to get him on the line, but his internet, like out at camp, was better sometimes than in town, right? He had really good internet because he's running a business out there, so he was able to attend. He probably wouldn't have been able to attend half the meetings if they weren't on Zoom. He's got to make a living at what he does. But I agree that there's no real substitute for in-person stuff. It isn't, especially if you're, and I don't ever pretend to speak on behalf of First Nations, but what I learned when I was up there is the importance of being in person, the importance of gathering, especially on the land, you know, especially on the land. When we were able to do that for some of our meetings or some of our field visits, it was unbelievably important.
Great. And Kevin?
Yeah, and just building on what Tim says there about the land, I started taking municipal candidates for the upcoming election for walks in the woods back in like April and May, 5 months ago now, and the importance of that. And what amazes me is you get these really, really busy people who say, well, I can only meet with you for 30 minutes or whatever, and then you get them for a hike in the woods, and suddenly they're no longer in a hurry, and well, I can take an hour or two, and you're kind of, we're at the 3-hour mark now, and they're saying, well, I'm still in no hurry to get back to the office, and can you tell me more about this, that, or the other thing? And so it's and then the other thing is they call you back saying, can I bring 3 other people out and we do that hike again or such? So we can't underestimate the importance of building that rapport or the impact that one can have. And quite simply, I'll often position it sometimes with a skeptical person of, give me an afternoon of a couple hours of your time, and I'll give you an afternoon you'll remember the rest of your life. And it's often amazing the impact you can have taking somebody out in nature to see an endangered species they've never seen before, or something that most Canadians might not see on a regular basis. But one of the other nice things about Zoom that I think has been a huge advantage in the pandemic as more and more meetings have gone online is the ability to do multiple meetings in a night. One of the challenges we face in this region is the fact that we've got 7 different, if you count region, 8 different councils. There are not 8 days in a week. And so that means you're going to get overlapping. So the number of times on a Monday night, you have to be in both Wilmot Township and the City of Waterloo, who both meet on Monday. And, there's an issue, and you rather than having to choose which one I'm going to be at, with Zoom now you can go to both in the same night and speak to each. So that ability, and it's not just locally, the ability for me to participate and help groups up in Simcoe or Niagara or across the entire province, it just opens up entirely new opportunities.
Great. And Suzanne?
Just from my experience, maybe slightly differently. Personally, I agree hybrid model works best because sometimes the commute, like tonight, right? It would not be possible for me to commute to Waterloo. But something that worked to our benefit, although I don't wish for COVID to continue beyond this, was that during those 2 years where we had lockdown, we had more attention from our supporters because frankly, there wasn't much else to do. So we ran webinar series, deep education meetings around climate change and how it interrelates with all the other issues that we face. And the attendance was very, very high for the number of people that usually come to webinars, simply because we were all at home. So if there was something that you could do, you would join. I don't know if that would last beyond, when things are opening up now. But that was one benefit where we got the ear of the supporters. And we ran also a lot of training sessions around how to speak to your MP or your MPP, or how to depute at a council meeting. And people in many different areas were able to join, simply again, because we were all home. And it was sort of the norm in how we were working. So it helped us from the education perspective. But again, I wish for it to be over.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, then I just want to go back to Brooklyn's question from the question and answer. How do we speed up the transformation from a car-focused neighborhood to livable communities?
In the existing neighborhoods, it's tough. I'll be the first to admit that. But one of the strategies that municipalities have to start really focusing on is when they're opening up new neighborhoods or even individual subdivisions, you've got to get transit into it right away. And I don't care if there's only 2 or 3 people on it, for the first little while, and it doesn't seem cost effective. In the first couple months that people are in a new home, they develop their transportation patterns. And if there is no transit, they'll buy a second car if they need it. And once they've got that car, they're not going to hop on a bus, or, very difficult to get them out of it. And yet, when you take a look at the cost of car ownership, our ability to deliver affordable housing or more affordable housing, especially when you start to include transportation as part of the housing cost, because it needs to be considered. A really cheap place where you can't get to anywhere except by, driving 3 hours each way at especially with the cost of gas going up, isn't affordable. But so if we can get transit in early into subdivisions, into communities, into new places, even new people moving into those areas, if there already is a bus there, when they start to roll over, they can do it with one car or no cars potentially. And our goal, I'd be living in a fantasy world if I thought that the entire region of Waterloo, there's going to be massive areas where we get rid of all the cars. No, what we're going to end up with is, corridors, the main ones, some of the cross corridors, where a huge percentage of people have access without using their car. All the areas in between, our goal really needs to be to keep them to one car, because they're going to be an automobile focus. But man, I showed you those pictures earlier. I drove out to a place in Columbia Forest about 3 years ago, and I went out there 3 times in 3 weeks just to confirm. There was one house had 7 cars. They were parked on the lawn. They were parked on the aprons. They were parked there. Right across the street were 5. So there was 12 cars between 2 houses. Like, absurd. But so much of the travel patterns are established in the first month, 2 months after we move in. There's not going to be a bus in a neighborhood for 3 years. It's going to take forever to get. You're going to have to roll over the community in order to reduce car ownership out there.
Yeah, it's a really great point, Kevin. I've never really thought about that, but of course, if you move into a house and you buy a new car or lease a car or something, you're not going to get a bus membership whenever it comes out. So yeah, it's a really great point.
And that's the big downside that we're facing right now with COVID to some extent, is so many people were afraid of going on transit and so bought a second car. And it's going to take the life cycle of those cars, for those to die basically in order to get people back onto transit at the levels that we had them before.
Yeah. Tim?
Certainly providing the alternative infrastructure is key. Having a viable alternative to the car in the neighborhood is really important. It's encouraging to see, certainly in the cities, the bike lanes, the raised bike lanes, the dedicated trails, like they're starting to become more and more of a standard. We're not there yet, we're not anywhere near where we need to be, but it's certainly encouraging to see when those bike lanes go in and that type of thing. But the other thing I have 2 small kids, and I think instilling that transit is a way of getting around in my kids is certainly important to me, and I think that's an important thing to do. Hey, you can get on the bus and go somewhere. You can get on the LRT and go somewhere. We don't have to take the car, all the time. We're a 1-car family. We're trying to exist as a 1-car family with 2 kids playing hockey. It's really challenging. But if you can instill that in them, that public transit or other ways of getting places are common or normal, or to them, as they grow up, they'll hopefully, this is my great parenting goal, that like hopefully that'll carry with them through their life, and maybe they won't need a car in places that they live, or maybe they'll limit it, or maybe they'll be car share, or those types of things, right? So
Yeah, that's almost another form of individual action for people to take. Just get their kids involved from a young age. Suzanne?
I have a follow-up question to this because I did not have a car for many, many years until I had a child during COVID and then got scared getting on the TTC. But I live on the Danforth, so really subway accessible. But my sister lives in Brampton, and when the subway extension was built, I was very happy because I could get to her house just getting on the subway. However, I realized I get off the subway and I need another hour and 20 minutes on 2 buses to get to a 20-minute drive. So what is the mechanism here when it's not cost effective because there's maybe no density, although Brampton, there's quite a bit of density. What is the mechanism here for this to be built better? Because it's not always individual action, because even if I'm willing and I want to, it still is taking me an additional hour, 20 minutes. You're not going to do it. It's just too long, right? At some point, you're going to say it's not worth my time, so I'll rather drive or get picked up or something. What's the mechanism here to get better transit in the cities? Understanding there's in some places, it's not going to be viable to live without a car. But if we were only at that percent of cars where people really have to have cars, I think we'll be in good shape. Versus now everybody has a car because transit is just not that accessible outside the subway lines. And I can only speak to here because I only know Toronto and the surrounding area. So any insights here or ideas would I appreciate it.
Can I respond to that? Because
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I remember back in probably 92, here I'm dating myself, I sat in a conference in London, and there was a very wise man who stood up and said something to the effect, I'll paraphrase it as best I can, we will never really implement transit until we start to think of transit. We have to stop thinking of transit as a subsidy, and at the same time we think of highways, building highways, as an investment. And it is just so ass backwards, if you pardon my thing, but that's exactly what it is. The number of times that I have argued with counselors who have said things like, you know, we're going to cut back that bus that goes out into that community, that neighborhood on the weekends and at other times, because there's only, I drive, you know, I'm driving around my car and I see 1 or 2 people on it. So why? It's not cost effective. And my response to one of them one day was, you know what? I got up on Sunday morning and I drove down Herb Street. I was the only one on Herb Street. Are we going to shut it down? We should shut it down. I mean, we can turn off the traffic lights. We don't have to plow it. I mean, people aren't using it. Why would we bother doing that? And they stood there and went, wow, good point. And that's what it is. We've got to start thinking of transit as the investment in our future. The days of investing in highways, those are now subsidies.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Other Kevin?
Yeah, and I think then again, to answer Suzanne's question a little bit, I think we're also suffering from 50 years of weak transit investment. You know, I look now, we finally see, to answer your Brampton question, the Huronia LRT finally getting planned that will go up Highway 10 and right into Brampton. We see the BRT now finally inching its way across Highway 7 that will then tie back into the subway in Vaughan, and you know, better connections out to the airport with the Up Express and others. And you know, I think that, you know, the options will get better in the future. On the other hand, we still have 50 years of deficit to overcome. And there are still going to be parts of the city that are still way too difficult to reach for a while yet. But hopefully we'll see that. And, you know, I think that leads into all kinds of things like high-speed rail and just all kinds of other things where then again, we're behind most of the rest of the world on. And hopefully we can play a bit of catch up in the years ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I'm no expert in transportation planning. I feel like every answer I give, I'm no expert in this. But I think what shows promise, I don't know if there's one answer, trying to answer Suzanne's question. I don't know if there's one answer. What I think shows promise is what we call major transit station area planning, and or MTSA for those of you that like acronyms. You know, I think there's some promise there. You know, building up around the station areas to make it a little bit more convenient. You know, for those people that want to live in that type of place. I mean, we're seeing some pretty unbelievable investment around the MTSAs in Waterloo region, certainly along the GO lines. You know, where you're seeing, you know, trying to accommodate as much growth as possible within those transit station areas. I think that shows some promise. But yeah, it is, you know, land use and transportation kind of go hand in hand. It's almost like, you know, we think about it as planners as you can't really talk about one without the other. Yeah, but I just thought that was something that's been showing promise lately.
Yeah, that's great.
If I can just jump in one second there. I think part of the answer, part of the problem that Suzanne was speaking to was we really need to coordinate better between our systems. We have so many boundaries, municipal boundaries, where we do this, and you know, whether it's roadways, but especially transit, you have to be able to get across conveniently multiple boundaries, especially in the GTA. It makes absolutely no sense that you're hopping from one system to another, and that's going to take Metrolinx. They're going to have to, you know, the province is going to have to step in, and the main lines that run through connected communities may have to be uplifted to the provincial level and operated as provincial or some type of a thing, because that's the only way you're going to get, you know, it's the GO service kind of at a local level is really what you need, and it's coming. You know, we're catching up a little bit. We're way behind, but you know something, I would have never believed that we'd be as far along as we are. As disappointing as it is that we've got so much more to go, it's coming. It's just coming awfully slowly.
Okay, going back to the Q&A, we have a question here from Betsy. She says that she heard on a webinar that the Hamilton City Council Progressive Municipal Plan had been stalled by the province, and that there was the sense that it was going to be referred to a provincial board, hoping that it was going to die. So her question was about, do you think that the Waterloo Region's plan would possibly meet the same fate? And also maybe if any of you are familiar with what's happening with the Hamilton plan, if you could maybe just fill in the audience as well.
Yeah, I'm not intimate with what's going on in that situation. However, there are letters coming out galore from the ministry. What happened was they changed the Planning Act not that long ago to basically dictate that the approval authority only had 120 days to review a plan and approve it. And having done a number of plans myself, approvals of them, that's absurd. If you're going to do a proper approval of a plan, you really need to get into it. You need to read it, you need to talk to people, you need to understand why the decisions were made. I think the fastest we ever did it locally was 8 months. Like the fastest. The last regional plan took 18 months. Who the heck thought that somehow we were going to go magically and approve these things in 4 months? So don't panic that, because what they did was, I think it was Bill 109, somebody down at Queen's Park went, oh, that was kind of silly. We're not going to be able to do it. We don't have the staff necessarily, the numbers with expertise. So we better give the minister the ability to waive the 120-day requirement. And to the best of my knowledge, that's all that's happened. It hasn't stalled. It has, you know, they haven't said we've stopped reviewing it. They've started reviewing all these plans that have dropped in front of them and said, we cannot possibly, in good faith, review these things in 120 days. Let's put out the letters. Halton's gotten one, Middlesex has gotten one, Hamilton's gotten one, Waterloo will get one. Absolutely no question in my mind. But that doesn't necessarily mean bad things yet. Will some of these end up at the board? My gut feeling is that the minister will probably, he wants to do things that will not look politically good for him, like stepping in on Hamilton, Waterloo, and Halton. I have no doubt in my mind that he wants to support more housing. The ministry or the province has it in their head. The only way to do that is to expand boundaries. And I think certainly Waterloo for sure has demonstrated you don't need to do that. You can do it a different way. Hamilton and Halton are trying to get there. They haven't demonstrated that yet. They're trying to get there. And I think the minister is probably going to be put in a position where if they want to do what the province wants to do, either he's going to have to do it and face the wrath, or he can pawn it off to the board to make a decision. And my guess is a couple of those, maybe not all of them, but a couple of those plans may well end up in front of the Ontario, or the Ontario Land Tribunal now. They keep changing the name of it. So just add to the confusion.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I think Kevin just covered it. I was going to say,
Okay.
I was just going to say that the minister certainly does have the power to refer it to the Ontario Land Tribunal if he wants to. And I think Kevin answered it. Excellent.
Okay. Interesting. Suzanne, a specific question for you here from Mark. Are you aware of the Amazon warehouse in Blair? If so, he was just interested in your opinion on it, your thoughts and opinions on it.
I'm sorry, I don't know the location and whether it's an issue, but I can look into it. And unless someone else on the panel knows, I don't know if that raises any environmental issues.
Yeah, if we don't have any familiarity with that specific project, we can move on.
I've got a bit.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
The Amazon warehouse in Blair raises some really interesting questions. It's in an area already designated for industrial. And so the big picture planning that was done years ago anticipated that type of use, maybe not that exact use, and certainly not at that scale, was, that it was okay to go there. And so I've got, it's the one I have trouble with. If we can't put them in industrial areas, where can we put them? Now there's heritage concerns around Blair. There's other, traffic issues that need to be looked at, but kind of the fundamental, it is so different than Pickering or so different than the glass plant in Stratford because it's on land designated industrial. So I'm not sure it's one that we want to all jump on board without really, that's one that you've got to get in and know the very specific facts in order to speak to it, because as a big picture, it's going exactly where we plan that type of use to go. So.
Great. Suzanne, another question here for you. What is the first step that you think people who might lack self-confidence but want to become more involved in their community, what's the first step that they can take?
So one of the things we encourage people is to never do it alone. Like when we encourage people to go to their elected officials' office or have a Zoom call, or even if you want to go around your neighborhood to talk about specific issues, is not to do it alone. Because going with other people that you trust, your friends, your neighbors, that just gives you a little bit more confidence. Another thing is that a lot of NGOs or local hubs provide training where you can go and participate in a session and then do some test driving. of how you get prepared, what information do you take with you, what happens when they ask you something you don't know, that's perfectly okay, because that's what most people are concerned about. So there's a lot of organizations around Ontario that provide training on those things and have recordings of trainings and mock, tests, cases. So if they wanted to reach out, I'm happy to provide. But not going alone is one of the ways I found that it's easier to have a conversation when you go with a friend or a neighbor. Yeah.
Great. Did anyone else want to jump in on that point? Or we can move on. Someone in the chat has a question about different types of urban development, I guess. They made some points about different types of either high rises or stacked townhomes and things like that. So they were interested in what you saw, models that worked better or worse to avoid sprawl while also avoiding, individual large towers and then other, single story.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, Kevin.
I seem to go first on a lot of these. I think the one thing that we need to really start concentrating on is how we start to increase the densities in some of our single detached dominated areas through duplexing, through other types of what we would call soft intensification. One of the things that's coming to mind a lot more these days is, I'm a senior. I live in a house by myself. My wife passed on. My 2 kids are gone. I may well want to live in this house an awful lot longer, but like a lot of people, I'm probably depending somewhat on the value in my house for my retirement. So duplexing my house would allow me to stay and yet allow me to create a second unit, either to rent or for purchase, conceivably. And that type of intensification has the potential to create a phenomenal number of units. And in fact, it's already happening in the region. But we've got to overcome the NIMBY aspects tied to that. And this is where, it goes back to what Kevin and I were talking about earlier, that you've got to look at the big picture. We need people out there supporting council on making decisions to eliminate what's called, exclusionary zoning. You only allow singles. Well, you know what? You can do tons of wonderful stuff with intensification in areas, and you'd never even know that there are additional people there. I had a duplex across the street from me. I lived here for 15 years and didn't realize it. And I'm an urban planner, and I talked to the people on the street, and I didn't even realize the place across the street was duplex. I mean, go figure. So, that's one way. The other is we've got to keep getting more into the missing middle. And maybe I can just take 1 second. People have lost track of what that phrase means. What the missing middle originally was if you're building a building over 4 stories, a residential building over 4 stories, you need an elevator. Up to 4 stories, I'm sorry, it was 4 stories and up, you need an elevator. Up to 4 stories, you don't. And so what you would get is if you're going to go to 3.5 stories, if you're going to break to 4 stories, all of a sudden you're going to need an elevator, well, you might as well go 10, because then, with the expense of the elevator, you pay. And what we lost was that middle. That's the missing middle between where an elevator is required and about 10 to 12 stories. There are very few buildings, and yet the best urban design cities around Madrid, Montreal, some of the most wonderful ones are mainly 4 to 6 stories. And, one of the reasons that we need that, or why that's so attractive, is somebody standing on a balcony on a 6-story building, believe it or not, you can talk to somebody on the street. You're connected to the street level. Once you go to 7, you can't. It's very, that's the point at which the residence up here breaks away from the street level. And so that's what we're trying to do when we talk about the missing middle. All of a sudden, the missing middle is everything from a single detached unit to 30 stories. And so there's that soft intensification that we talked about is one thing. It requires a whole different approach, and especially work on the NIMBY side to try and we've got to all get out there and make sure that the councillors are supported doing what's right for the community. But then we've got to figure out through building code changes and other things, how we actually get that missing middle. And it's tough, it's not easy, but that's where, that's where the solution to the sprawl and tall is by finding the stuff in that middle, and we've got to work hard to deliver it.
Great. Go ahead, Tim.
Kevin takes all the good points away, so I'll just add a couple.
You go first next, okay?
Yeah, maybe I gotta go. I'm a little slow on the Jeopardy buzzer. But yeah, I mean, I think in planning we often talk about density. I don't think we're going to be able to, get away from intensification, and nor should we. I mean, it's coming. It should be coming. I'm happy that it is. I think that the one point is that planning has always been a contextual discipline, and so I often, I like to make jokes. You haven't noticed already, but some of them land well, some of them don't. But if you get 12 people talking in a room about density, you'll get 14 to 20 different answers of what's the most appropriate density for a site, right? So it's contextual. 4 stories might work somewhere, and 6 might work another, and 3 might work somewhere else. And I would encourage people to go and walk around your neighborhood, or walk around wherever, and see if you can find those places that you can live with being in your neighborhood, right? Because they're coming, they're important, and for us to say, listen, I don't want any intensification in my neighborhood, or it's not appropriate here. I think those arguments are really going the way of the dodo bird. And if you, again, for my presentation, you can find something and open your mind up. What could you live with in your neighborhood that would be complementary to what's happening already? I think would go a long way when you're interacting with planners, or you're interacting with councillors, whoever. I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, it's a really great point, Tim, about putting the positive spin on it, not what don't I want. I don't want the super high rise, but what I do want is maybe a little bit more of effective, especially in the participation process. Kevin, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and I think it's important too, the missing middle is just so critical. But I think it's important to remember too that the missing middle in these complete communities isn't just a downtown Kitchener thing or a Toronto thing, but we could look at all our town's communities. So let's look at a town like Baden or Wellesley. Baden, for example, what's the opportunity to create a new main street in Baden? And can we create shops on the first level with walk-up apartments on the second and third levels, and try to create a more complete walkable community that's just compelling, and that anyone would want to visit or live there? So it's not just an urban thing, but I think we can look at how we can do this throughout the entire region or throughout the entire province. And I think that's one of the things that the regional official plan did really well. The latest draft of it was try to look and try to focus on the missing middle, trying to create these complete communities, and really just trying to create these livable places that we'd all want to be.
Great. And so we're coming right up on 9 o'clock, but as long as the panelists, you're free to leave if you need to, but I think we're going to try to go till for another about 10 minutes. We probably won't get to all the questions, but we'll try to get them answered and send them out in the email that we'll be sending out in a few days. So continuing on here, there was another question about transit, since it's not viable. for some communities outside of major cities, would making those communities self-reliant make them more livable. And that would mean creating microeconomies in those areas and encourage some growth. Tim, would you like to speak to that?
I got my finger on the buzzer there.
Yeah.
And it really is an excellent point. And some of the things we're talking about, you know, in planning right now is, you know, the word or the term complete communities is tossed around a lot. You know, a different way of a different way of characterizing it, of what planners have been talking about for a long time. But you know, the point about completing communities is another one. You know, so you know, if you look at some place or you think about your neighborhood or your community, what would it take to complete it, right? And I think that's possibly where the question's coming from is you know, how do you create these communities where you where you need to or you can decrease your amount of trips that you're taking outside of the community for things that you need every day, you know, and that's a big part of completing communities, having the diversity in your neighborhood, in your, you know, keeping your downtowns viable, those types of things, so that you can make those short trips without necessarily using the car all the time.
Great. And Kevin?
Yeah, just 2 quick points. You know, one of the things that just building on what Tim has said, the whole concept of things like food deserts, where, you know, there's large areas in a lot of communities where you just can't buy food. Like I was listening to CBC one time, and they were interviewing a lady who lived in Milton who had told them that she had to drive 3 kilometers to actually buy a quart of milk. And the reporter said, "Oh, you know, this is crazy. No way." He went and he said, "I was right. She was wrong. It was 4.5 kilometers to get a bag of milk." And that's absurd. I mean, we've got to start, you know, making sure that we complete the communities, as Tim was saying. Another thing, probably the best policy that died without ever anybody knowing about it, was actually in the 2006 growth plan, where it basically said any communities that are really commuter communities, the Orangevilles, the et cetera, you could not expand your boundaries unless you were planning for a minimum of 1 job per 3 residential units. And that was actually in the growth plan. And I don't know a planner in Ontario, other than myself and the people who worked on the growth plan in 2006, we even knew it was in there, and then it disappeared in the 2017 version. But that's the type of thing that starts to drive at least making sure that people are trying to create jobs in balance with residential in these communities. And, you know, things like where Tim's working in Wellesley, it's tough. You start to struggle with, how do I intensify, you know, how do I put missing middle in my downtown? How do I create a 15-minute community? And also, how do I create enough jobs out there that I'm not just adding population who's going to drive to Waterloo, which defeats our climate change issue. So that's where you've got to look at these communities, and Kevin's dead on. This just doesn't apply to the big ones. We've got to start thinking of our small communities and working hard. And I know Tim is in Wellesley, to his credit, to talk about how do we make them complete. We can't make sure that everybody who lives in Wellesley works in Wellesley and shops in Wellesley, but damn it, if we don't at least provide the opportunities, they never will. We know for sure at that point. Excuse my language. Of course, it's being recorded on the day I say damn it.
That's okay. I appreciate the passion, Kevin.
So
with this,
allowed to do things like that.
So you guys may have covered this already, but John had a question about donut economics. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that concept, but he was asking about if any of you have used that idea in any of your presentations or strategies that you've used.
Come on, Kevin, you're shaking your head. It's
Yeah, well, I think, you know, then again, the concept, if people aren't familiar with the donut economy, it's just this idea of a much more circular, inclusive economy. And, you know, I think it's obviously what we've got to be moving towards. And, you know, it just ties into that whole livability, sustainability, you know, just the direction we're going. And I think the good news is there's a lot of that already happening. Not only, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, on our regional official plan, but the local official plans that play out of that. There's just, you know, the Transform Waterloo Region climate change strategy to have, you know, 50% reductions by 2030 and 80% reductions by 2050. There's so many things where we're already moving towards that. Is it happening fast enough? Maybe not, but at least I think, you know, we're leading the province in so many of those areas. So, you know, I think that comes back to the livable communities, and, you know, thank goodness we've had so many engaged citizens in Waterloo who for decades have really been out there rallying and working to ensure that you know, our municipalities, our townships, our cities, our region are often leading the forefront and pioneering a lot of these things.
Great. Another question for you, Suzanne. Are stakeholders connected effectively and appropriately, and which stakeholders do you find challenges with connecting to? So we've kind of spoken to this point a couple times tonight. So I was wondering if you could maybe speak more to some of the strategies that you've used to maybe not people that have always been difficult to connect with through, you know, technology, but so what are the strategies that you've used to incorporate those people that do struggle to connect through technology, through email or Zoom or what have you?
So obviously in person, right? Going to where they are. We participate in a lot of in-person events led by other groups. We don't always have to lead. But yes, I think in person, picking up the phone, maybe at the beginning, but then making the time to actually go out wherever they are, those stakeholders, and sitting with them and trying to understand where they're coming from, what their issues are, concerns, and address it. So I think at some point, virtual is good, but in person is as important. And the human connection, I think I'm still, like everybody else, I think on this panel, feel that that is critical for the advancement of humanity. And I am old-fashioned, and I'm old, so I still believe very much in the human connectivity. I mean, technology facilitates, but you do need the face-to-face in appropriate times.
Great. Okay, so with 2 minutes left here, I'll ask my final question. So for everyone, is there anything that has not already been mentioned tonight that you'd like residents to understand about the planning process or public participation or anything else?
I have one comment. I think the regional plan that just went through is a great document. At some point, the province is going to open up the environmental registry for public comments on the regional plan. I would encourage everybody, you know, that has the opportunity to make comment. Hopefully, if enough of us share our support for the plan, the province may start to realize we've got something really special going here in Waterloo. The new regional plan is a great document. The people who worked on it did a really good job in consultation with the community, and hopefully, to use my language again, hopefully the province doesn't bugger it up.
Okay, over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, and if I can just further that and say we're in the midst of a municipal election right now, or a campaign. We're only days away from voting. I would encourage people to make sure they get out and vote, but also speak to your candidates and make sure they understand the regional official plan, see if they are supportive of it, and ensure that they will fight for it in the future. I think there's a lot of really important questions we could be asking to make sure we've got those engaged, livable communities we really want in the future.
Great. And any final points, Suzanne or Tim?
I was just going to say that planning is slow. And, some of these things that we're talking about take a while to get right. And patience is a virtue. I think about that every day. Most planners that I talk to are working hard on these things, but it is slow. It is slow. And, it's better to be slow than wrong. I know that there's some pretty significant challenges that are ahead of climate change isn't slowing down. I don't want to undermine that whatsoever, but careful planning is important. That's my pitch for planning this evening.
Okay, thanks everyone. So as mentioned earlier, we will be sending out an email in about 5 days, including everything that's listed here. And as I mentioned, answering any of the last few questions that we didn't get to tonight. A reminder about the feedback survey popping up as you exit the webinar. If you could fill that out, that would be great. Thanks again to our speakers, Kevin Eby, Tim Van Hinty, Suzanne Carrajerbilian, and Kevin Thomason for their presentations and their answers. They were all very great tonight. It was a great conversation. And thanks again to our sponsors as well, the Township of Wilmot, Kindred Credit Union, and the Future Ground Network. And finally, thank you to all of you who participated tonight. We hope that you have learned something about livable communities and the planning process, and have been motivated to become more engaged and maybe even start a movement. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good night. Get out and vote.